There are moments in your life when God pulls you away, and at first it feels like rejection, but heaven calls it redirection. What you thought was people walking out was actually God pulling you UP. Sometimes the only way God can move you beyond the limitations of your bloodline is to separate you from the patterns that held them bound. Your separation is not a punishment, it is a prophecy. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, hear me today. Have you ever wondered why certain people couldn't stay connected to you? Why the relationships you tried to fix kept falling apart? Why the circle you started with is not the circle you are standing with? I came to tell somebody, the separation in your life is not chaos, it is construction. God is building something in you that cannot survive in the environment you came from. God is elevating you to a level where familiar voices can't follow, familiar spirits can't cling, and familiar limitations can't hold you. Sometimes God has to break your alignment with people so he can restore your assignment with purpose. You are not being isolated, you are being initiated into your next dimension. Somebody shout, my separation is my elevation. Separation is one of the most misunderstood moves of God in a believer's life. Because when God begins to pull you away from certain people, places, and patterns, it rarely feels divine in the moment. It feels personal. It feels painful. It feels like something is being taken from you, when in reality something is being prepared for you. When God separates you, he is not responding to your emotions. He is orchestrating your elevation. You think it's random, but it's strategic. You think it's loss, but it's positioning. You think it's rejection, but it's protection. And until you see your separation through the eyes of heaven, you will misinterpret the move that was meant to propel you. There are seasons when God must interrupt your comfort because your comfort has become your cage. You have grown so used to the environment you came from that you cannot even sense how much it has limited your capacity. God looks at your life and says, I cannot allow you to stay here another moment. You've outgrown this level. You've outgrown this mindset, outgrown this circle. And when God sees you trying to shrink to fit where you used to be, he initiates a divine disturbance. He will create a shift so undeniable that you cannot cling to the old even if you tried. This is not the enemy tearing your world apart. This is God tearing down what would have trapped you. When separation is divine, it is precise. God doesn't remove everything, he prunes selectively. He removes what drains you, what distracts you, what delays you. He removes connections that keep you emotionally comfortable but spiritually stuck. He removes people who celebrate your past but cannot handle your potential. He removes the voices that speak to your fears but are blind to your future. And he does it intentionally because if certain relationships remained intact, they would sway you, slow you, or sabotage what God is trying to birth through you. Sometimes God allows friction to expose who can't stay. He lets the misunderstanding happen. He lets the distance form. He lets the doors close. He lets the conversations shift, not because they did something wrong, because they no longer serve the journey you're called to. You are not cursed, you are being carved. You are not abandoned, you are being advanced. When God separates, he separates with direction. He doesn't just take you out, he takes you forward. There were people in your life who were tied to your identity at one level, but could never survive your transformation into the next level. God had allowed them to remain. You would have continued adapting yourself to match their expectation of you. You would have dimmed your light to keep them comfortable. You would have carried weight that was never yours to carry. Divine separation sets you free from everything you were never meant to maintain. It liberates you from emotional obligations that were draining your destiny. Frees you from the familiar so you can finally embrace the future. The danger of staying connected to the wrong environment is that it can convince you that where you are is all you can be. Some families, friend groups, or community circles operate like lids, comfortable but constricting. They love you as long as you don't outgrow them. They support you as long as you don't surpass them. They embrace you as long as you don't evolve beyond what they can understand. When God sees that your potential is being suffocated by familiarity, he steps in and he separates you Not because you are too good for them, but because His calling on your life requires more than they can cultivate. Divine separation is not God pulling you away from people. It is God pulling you toward purpose. Every time God elevates a person in Scripture, He separates them first. Separation is the womb of elevation. You cannot stay in the same patterns, the same conversations, the same comfort zones, and expect to rise. Elevation demands space, space to grow, space to think, space to hear God clearly, space to unlearn the limitations that were spoken over you. God separates you so you can finally recognize that there is more in you than your environment ever affirmed. You interpret as a breaking is actually a building. God is building your independence from people's approval. God is building your strength to walk by faith when you feel alone. God is building your discernment to know who should walk with you in the next chapter. God is building your identity so that you no longer rely on familiar validation to feel valuable. When God separates you, He is preparing you to stand on a platform that the old version of you could not handle. You may not like the feeling of separation. You will love the results of it. You will look back and realize that every person who left made room for someone better aligned with your destiny. Every place you were pushed out of was preparing you for a place you were created for. Every door that closed was directing you toward the door God had already opened. Separation is painful, but it is purposeful. If you trust the God who separates, you'll live to see the elevation He intended all along. God will often break the power of familiarity in your life because familiarity is one of the greatest enemies of identity. You cannot fully become who God has called you to be while remaining confined to the version of yourself that others are comfortable with. There are people who have known you for so long that they can only see you through the lens of your history, not your destiny. They remember your beginnings, your mistakes, your childhood patterns, your insecurities, and your failures. And because they remember where you started, they assume they know where you are going. But God does not consult your past to determine your future. When He calls you into purpose, He breaks the hold of every voice that tries to confine you to who you used to be. When you stay in environments where you are overly familiar, people become blind to your growth. They stop seeing your potential because they've become accustomed to your presence. You could be evolving, stretching, maturing, transforming, and they won't recognize it because they have already labeled you. And once someone labels you, they stop listening to the part of you that is changing. They interact with the memory of who you were, not the reality of who you're becoming. This is why God often separates you from people who knew you when, because their attachment to your history can become a hindrance to your destiny. God knows that if you remain too long in a place where people only expect the old version of you, you will eventually shrink back into that version just to maintain peace. You will downplay your calling to avoid conflict. You will silence your dreams to avoid criticism. You will hide your growth to avoid resentment. God sees that you are molding yourself to fit an outdated image. He disrupts the environment. He stirs something inside you that refuses to be comfortable with mediocrity. He awakens a restlessness that makes old patterns unbearable. He begins to whisper to you that there is more in you, more for you, more ahead of you. Suddenly the relationships that once felt familiar now feel limiting. The conversations that once fit your season now feel too small. The circles that once energized you now drain you. That shift is not random, it is divine. Familiarity can also create emotional attachments that drown your spiritual calling. You can become so loyal to the comfort of certain relationships that you remain loyal to the limitation they create. You love certain people so deeply that you overlook how their expectations have muted your gifts. You care about their acceptance so much that you stop pursuing your assignment. But God will never allow loyalty to become a leash. When your loyalty to familiarity begins to compete with your loyalty to purpose, God steps in and separates you, not because He wants to tear relationships apart, but because He wants to pull you into alignment with your identity. And here's the truth: your identity will always outgrow your environment before your environment catches up with your identity. You will feel the shift inside before anyone else understands it. You'll start feeling different, thinking differently, desiring differently, dreaming differently. And when people around you see that shift, they may feel threatened or confused. They will say things like, "You've changed," not realizing that the real miracle is that you're finally becoming who you were created to be. When people resist your growth, it's not because you're doing something wrong. It's because your evolution exposes their stagnation. But you cannot dim your identity to keep others comfortable. You cannot shrink your calling to protect someone else's feelings. God did not invest his spirit in you just for you to hide it under the weight of familiarity. What people call change, God calls identity. You are not changing, you are revealing what was always inside you. You are stepping into the version of yourself that heaven had in mind before your family shaped you, before your experiences wounded you, before your environment limited you. Identity is not something you create, it is something you uncover. You cannot uncover identity in a place where you are forced to pretend. God breaks you away from familiarity so he can bring you into authenticity. Every great transformation in Scripture required separation. Abraham had to leave his father's house to discover his identity as the father of nations. Joseph had to be separated from his brothers to step into his destiny in Egypt. David had to leave the fields to be anointed. Jesus himself had to step away from Nazareth because the people said, "This not the carpenter's son." Proof that familiarity will always try to reduce divinity to something common. God separates you so that the greatness in you can be recognized, nurtured, and revealed in the right environment. Sometimes the break in familiarity is painful because it feels like people are rejecting you. God is not breaking relationships out of cruelty. He is breaking limitations so you can see yourself correctly. You have spent years hearing opinions, judgments, and assumptions about who you are. And as long as you remain surrounded by those voices, you will keep adjusting yourself to fit their comfort zone. God separates you so that for the first time, you can hear his voice above all others. He separates you so you can see yourself through his eyes, not theirs. God breaking familiarity is God birthing identity. You cannot walk in a new anointing with an old identity. You cannot carry a new mantle with an old mindset. You cannot fulfill a God-sized calling while wearing a man-made label. When God separates you, he is not taking something from you. He is giving something back to you. He is restoring the identity that was buried under expectations, opinions, limitations. And once God reveals who you truly are, no familiar voice will ever be able to confine you again. Family limitations are real. They are not final. Many people struggle to believe this because the first environment they experienced was shaped by the limitations, patterns, and mindsets of their family. When you grow up around certain beliefs, behaviors, and ceilings, it becomes easy to assume that those invisible boundaries are permanent. You begin to think that what happened to them must happen to you. What they could not do, you will not be able to do. And where they stopped is the farthest you can go. But God does not call you according to your bloodline. He calls you according to your divine design. You were born through your family, but you were created by God. And the one who created you is not restricted by the limitations of the people who raised you. Your family may pass down many things, habits, fears, cycles, emotional patterns, ways of thinking. But God has a way of interrupting generational flow with a single life. There is always someone in every family line who carries a different kind of grace, a different kind of hunger, a different kind of vision. Someone who cannot settle for what everyone else accepted. Someone who feels a tug inside that refuses to be confined. Someone who looks at the patterns around them and says silently in their spirit, there has to be more than this. If you are reading these words and they resonate deeply, you are likely that person. You are the breaker. You are the interruption. You are the exception that God chose to make the new expectation. Family limitations can come in many forms. Sometimes they are emotional, like the inability to love deeply, communicate openly, or heal fully. Sometimes they are mental, ways of thinking that keep people small, afraid, or reactive. Sometimes they are financial, patterns of lack, mismanagement, survival mentality. Sometimes they are spiritual, cycles of instability, unbelief, or generational oppression. These limitations feel powerful because they have history behind them. They have repetition behind them. You watch generations before you abide by these boundaries without question. But The fact that something has been repeated does not make it God's will. And the fact that something held your family back does not mean it holds authority over your destiny. God will often separate you from your family's way of thinking before He separates you from your family itself. He begins by renewing your mind, giving you dreams that don't match your upbringing, and stirring desires that don't resemble anything you've seen modeled. You start thinking differently before you ever move differently. You begin to desire more, expect more, seek more, believe for more than what the family narrative predicted. This inner shift is the first sign that God is delivering you from limitation. It may cause tension. It may create misunderstanding. Some family members may accuse you of being prideful or ungrateful or acting like you're better than. But God is not elevating you to make you superior. He is elevating you to make you responsible. You are being called to break what others did not have the strength to confront. Even Jesus experienced family limitation. When He returned to Nazareth, the people said, "Is this not Joseph's son?" They could only see Him through the lens of familiarity. They tried to reduce His divinity to their human memory. That is what family limitations often do. They attempt to shrink your identity to what makes others comfortable. They try to keep you in the role you were born into rather than the purpose you were created for. But when God places greatness inside of you, no environment, no matter how familiar, has the authority to define you. God will move you beyond the space where people only see you as a child, a sibling, a relative, or a role. He separates you so you can finally step into the identity that was hidden beneath the expectations of your upbringing. The challenge with family limitations is that they are often invisible. You do not notice them until you try to rise above them. You don't see the ceiling until you start jumping. And when you attempt to break cycles financially, emotionally, spiritually, some family members may not celebrate you. Not because they don't love you, but because your growth confronts their comfort. When you succeed, they are forced to face everything they settled for. When you change, they feel exposed for not changing. When you rise, they feel pressured to rise too. Your purpose cannot wait for others to feel ready. You cannot delay your destiny to preserve their comfort. You are called to step into what God ordained, even if it separates you for a season. Family limitations are not curses. They are opportunities for God to reveal His power through you. The very area where your family struggled is often the area where God will anoint you. If financial struggle ran through your family, God may be raising you to walk in stewardship and abundance. If emotional dysfunction was common in your family, God may be equipping you with healing, stability, and wisdom. If spiritual dryness was normal, God may ignite you as the spiritual catalyst. God takes the very places where your family reached its end, and He uses them as the beginning of your purpose. Being chosen to break family limitations is not easy. It can feel lonely. It can feel heavy. There are days when you may wonder why God didn't choose someone else, someone older, someone stronger, someone more prepared. But God does not choose the qualified. He qualifies the chosen. And He chose you because you carry what the previous generation prayed for. You are the answer to prayers your ancestors never lived to see fulfilled. You are the fulfillment of potential that your family couldn't express. You are the testimony that God can rewrite a bloodline through one obedient heart. Where your family stopped is not where you will stop. What they could not overcome is not your portion. What limited them is not the ceiling for you. Just because you came from them does not mean you are confined to them. God is elevating you beyond family limitations, not to abandon your family, to lead them, not to look down on them, but to lift them, not to escape the legacy, but to transform it. You are proof that family limitations may be real. Through God, they will never be final. Elevation always requires isolation because God does His deepest work in your life when He has your undivided attention. There are seasons when God must pull you away from the noise, away from the opinions, away from the crowd, and away from the familiar so He can develop something inside of you that cannot grow in public. Destiny is conceived in private long before it is revealed in public. When God chooses to elevate you, he first chooses to isolate you, not to punish you, to prepare you. Isolation is not loneliness, it is divine separation. It is God clearing the stage so he can begin a personal conversation with your soul. Many people fear isolation because they mistake it for abandonment, but God often speaks the loudest when everything else becomes silent. You cannot hear destiny clearly when you are surrounded by distractions. You cannot receive clear instructions when you are influenced by too many voices. You cannot grow roots when you're constantly surrounded by movement. So God steps in and breaks the patterns of your social environment. Suddenly you find yourself withdrawing from certain friends, losing interest in familiar conversations, feeling disconnected from circles that once energized you. You start feeling out of place, not because something is wrong with you, but because something is shifting in you. Every major biblical figure experienced divine isolation before elevation. Joseph was isolated in a pit and a prison. Moses was isolated on the backside of the desert. David was isolated in the shepherd's field. Jesus was isolated in the wilderness for 40 days. Pattern is unmistakable. God separates his chosen ones before he showcases them. Isolation becomes the womb where greatness is formed. God hides you to heal you, strengthens you in secret, equips you away from the eyes of people who are not yet ready to understand what he is doing in your life. Isolation exposes you to yourself. When God pulls you away from the crowd, you begin to see what you've been ignoring, what you've been avoiding, and what you've been carrying. Quiet space of divine separation, your wounds come to the surface, your insecurities reveal themselves, and your buried potential starts to speak. You cannot outrun your internal battles in isolation. You must confront them. And this confrontation is necessary for elevation because God will not take you to a level that your character is not prepared to sustain. Isolation is the classroom where character is built, patience is developed, and humility is learned. Elevation demands a stronger foundation than the one you had at the previous level. God cannot place new weight on the old structure of your life while you remain surrounded by the familiar influences that shaped you. He must rewire your thinking, renew your strength, and redefine your identity. And these transformations rarely happen in crowded places. They happen when he pulls you into solitude. It is in isolation that your prayer life deepens, your sensitivity to God increases, your spiritual maturity expands. It is in isolation that you begin to understand that elevation is not just about going higher. It is about going deeper. Isolation is also God's way of protecting the process. People often misunderstand or interfere with what they cannot comprehend. If God exposed your transformation too early, others might sabotage it with their doubts, their fears, or their opinions. He highlights you to prevent premature exposure. He shields you from the pressure of expectations so you can grow at the pace he designed. Just as a seed must remain underground before it breaks through the soil, you must remain hidden before God allows your elevation to be seen. Being unseen is not a sign of insignificance. It is a sign of incubation. During isolation, God also reveals who is truly meant to walk with you. When he separates you, he strips away the people who are attached to your past, but not assigned to your future. Isolation is the filter that removes temporary relationships and exposes true covenant connections. Those who withdraw from you during your isolation were never meant to handle your elevation. Those who remain without demanding access to your process are those God has trusted with your next dimension. Isolation reveals authenticity. You will also notice that isolation awakens spiritual hunger. When you are separated from everything you used to lean on, you are forced to lean into God in ways you never have before. You discover strength you didn't know you had, clarity you didn't know you needed, an anointing you didn't know was possible. You become aware of gifts that were dormant and callings that were waiting to be revealed. God uses isolation to strip away the noise so the voice inside you can rise. But isolation doesn't always feel spiritual. Sometimes it feels confusing and uncomfortable. You may wonder why relationships are fading, why commitments are shifting, why doors are closing. You may feel misunderstood or even forgotten. But isolation is not God forgetting you. It's God focusing on you. It is a sign that he is about to do something in your life so significant that distractions can no longer be tolerated. Isolation is the bridge between where you've been and where God is taking you. Elevation requires isolation because new levels demand new versions of you. The old version of you is not equipped to carry the new mantle. God isolates you to transform you, to stretch you, to strip away what cannot come with you, to strengthen what must. He elevates your inner world before He elevates your outer world. When God isolates you, He is not taking you away from people. He is taking you closer to purpose. When the season of isolation lifts, you will emerge different. You will carry a depth, clarity, a maturity, and an anointing that could have only been birthed in solitude. When God elevates you publicly, the strength, wisdom, and identity you gained in isolation will keep you grounded. You will look back and understand why certain people had to be removed, why certain doors closed, why the silence was necessary. Isolation is not the end, it is the beginning of elevation. When God separates you, it is because He is preparing to reveal a greater version of you. And when you surrender to isolation instead of resisting it, you position yourself for the extraordinary work God desires to do in your life. You may come from your family. You are not confined to become everything your family has been. Your birthplace is not your boundary, and your genealogy is not your destiny. Every bloodline, God raises someone who breaks the mold, someone who refuses to repeat what has been modeled, someone who carries a different kind of grace that disrupts the patterns that have lingered for generations. That person is often misunderstood, often resisted, often set apart, not because they are the favorite of the family, but because they have been chosen by God to start something new. Your bloodline may be the starting point, but God never intended it to be the finishing line. There is a powerful truth that many people struggle to accept. God can pull greatness out of places that never produced it before. Pause just because your family never walked in healing, never walked in purpose, never walked in financial stability, never walked in spiritual authority, never walked in emotional wholeness does not mean you are destined to repeat the same cycles. You are not just the continuation of your family's past. You are the beginning of a new lineage. God is not calling you to maintain the legacy of what was. God is calling you to birth the legacy of what A can be. He has placed something inside you that did not exist in the generations before you. Vision, strength, insight, hunger, resilience, calling. And these divine deposits are signals that God is using you to break the old pattern and initiate a new one. Sometimes the greatest evidence that you are chosen to start a new lineage is the tension you feel with your old one. You don't think like them. You don't desire what they desire. You don't accept what they accept. You feel a constant pull toward more, even when the people around you think you should be satisfied with what has always been. Inner dissatisfaction with a limited life is not arrogance. It is anointing. It is God whispering to your spirit that you were created for something bigger than the boundaries you were born into. When God begins elevating someone beyond family limitations, He often lets them feel like an outsider before He positions them as a leader. You may feel disconnected from your family's mindset because God is aligning you with a higher mindset. There are families where fear was passed down like inheritance. Fear of dreaming, fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of stepping out, fear of evolving. But God placed courage in you, not so you could fit in, but so you could rise up. There are families where cycles of poverty dictated what was possible. But God placed stewardship and vision in you, not so you could survive, but so you could build. There are families where broken relationships were expected and emotional instability seemed normal. God placed healing and wisdom in you, not so you could repeat dysfunction, but so you could rewrite the story. The shift begins inside before it manifests outside, long before God changes the external narrative of a family. He plants a seed in the heart of one person, a seed of faith, a seed of purpose, a seed of difference. That seed begins to grow quietly internally in ways that others may not immediately recognize. You begin to dream differently, think differently, speak differently. You begin to question what others accepted as normal. You begin to imagine possibilities that no one around you has ever considered. This inner stirring is God's way of showing you that the finishing line of previous generations is your starting point. However, Stepping into this calling often comes with resistance. When you begin to break cycles, you confront beliefs that have been held for decades. You challenge boundaries that no one else dared to cross. You disrupt comfort zones that people have grown attached to. Some family members may not understand you. Some may misinterpret you. Some may even oppose you, not because they are against you, because your growth challenges what they settled for. But elevation always requires endurance. When God sets you apart to elevate you, He equips you with the emotional and spiritual strength to keep pushing even when others don't see what you see. You are not called to dishonor your family. You are called to deliver your family. You are not rising to escape them. You are rising to expand them. The transformation God is doing in you is not meant to end with you. It is meant to flow through you. You are the evidence to your bloodline that change is possible. You are the proof that cycles can be broken. You are the testimony that God can rewrite a generational narrative. Your breakthroughs will become the new expectations. Your victories will become the new normal. What you establish in your generation will become the foundation for the generations that follow. When God elevates you beyond family limitations, He is not erasing your history. He is redeeming it. Everything you learned, everything you endured, everything you witnessed becomes fuel for where He is taking you. You become the one who shows your family that healing exists beyond hurt, faith exists beyond fear, that abundance exists beyond lack, that purpose exists beyond survival. You become the one who shows them that God does not choose based on background. He chooses based on calling. And when God calls someone, no limitation, genetic, emotional, financial, cultural, or spiritual, has the power to stop the elevation He has ordained. Your bloodline may be where your story began. It is not where your story ends. God has written chapters for you that have never been written for anyone in your family. He is leading you into territories your family never touched, opening doors they never walked through, giving you opportunities they never imagined, and birthing in you a legacy they never saw. You are not just breaking limits, you are breaking ground. You are not just rising, you are redefining what rising looks like. You are not just escaping family limitations, you are elevating your family through the elevation God is doing in you. Finishing line of past generations is the starting point of your destiny. And when God elevates you beyond family limitations, He does so to show future generations what is possible when one person in a family says yes to God. If someone could walk away from your life, it means their presence was never tied to your purpose. God never allows a person who is essential to your destiny to leave you. When someone exits your life, whether through distance, disagreement, betrayal, or simply growing apart, it is not a sign of your failure. It is a sign of God's filtration. He is purifying your circle so that only those who are aligned with your calling can remain. Feels like abandonment is often divine subtraction. What you interpret as loss is frequently God removing what could have limited your future. There are people who were meant to be part of your journey, but never meant to reach your destination. Some relationships are assignments for a season, companions for a lifetime. But because we are human, we often mistake seasonal people for permanent pillars. We try to hold on to what God is trying to release. We cling to connections that were never meant to last because we fear the discomfort of change. Yet God knows that if certain people remained in your next chapter, they would bring old energy, old habits, old wounds, old limitations into a space meant for new growth. When God is elevating you, He becomes intentional about who surrounds you. He will not allow people with small minds, divided loyalties, or hidden agendas to walk beside you in seasons where focus, purity, and strength are required. God begins to create distance. Conversations become shorter, interactions become less frequent. The bond feels different, not because something is wrong with you, but because the assignment attached to that relationship has expired. The difficulty for many is accepting that the expiration of an assignment does not mean the relationship was a mistake. Some people were blessings for a season, but burdens for a lifetime. Others were companions for a chapter, but would become obstacles in the conclusion. God removes them to preserve the purity of your purpose. What walks away reveals what was never meant to stay. People who are meant for your destiny will not quit on you easily. They will not be intimidated by your growth. They will not resent your elevation. They will not compete with your calling. The ones who walk away when you rise were never connected to your purpose. They were connected to your level. They could handle you when you were broken, when you were uncertain, when you were still trying to figure out who you were. But once God begins lifting you, once he begins revealing strength in you, once you begin stepping into the identity he placed inside you, some people become uncomfortable. Your elevation exposes their stagnation. Your growth highlights their refusal to grow. Your progress confronts their complacency. Often people leave because your new level demands a version of them they are unwilling to become. They preferred the you that depended on them, the you that needed validation, the you that accepted limitations. When God pulls you out of old mindsets, some people miss the version of you that tolerated their dysfunction. So they walk away blaming you for changing, when in truth, they were only compatible with your brokenness, not your breakthrough. But you cannot apologize for evolving. You cannot shrink back to keep someone else comfortable. You cannot dim your light to maintain relationships that thrive in darkness. Letting people walk away is one of the hardest tests of elevation. Love wants to hold on. Loyalty wants to keep trying. Hope wants to believe people can change. Elevation requires discernment. Not everyone is meant to go where God is taking you. Not everyone has the maturity, the character, the spiritual fortitude to walk alongside you at higher levels. When God is preparing you for greater, he will never allow someone who would poison your purpose to stay attached. His protection sometimes comes disguised as people leaving. Here is the truth many struggle to face if they left. It means God knew something you didn't. He heard conversations you never heard. He saw motives you never saw. He witnessed intentions hidden behind smiles, insecurities hidden behind encouragement, and resentment hidden behind compliments. God removes people because he is preserving your destiny. What leaves your life cannot sabotage you unless you chase after it. You only lose when you run after what God removed. Your destiny does not depend on who left. It depends on who is aligned with your next season. God subtracts, he always adds differently. When he closes relational doors, he always opens doors to new connections, connections that uplift instead of drain, inspire instead of discourage, and align instead of distract. He cannot bring the right people into your life while you are still grieving the loss of the wrong ones. You must trust that God knows what he is doing when he allows distance to form. Walking away is not always a betrayal. Sometimes it is a blessing. Sometimes God saves your future by unsettling your present. Sometimes he protects your purpose by removing what could have poisoned it. Sometimes he strengthens you by forcing you to stand without the support you once depended on. This is where spiritual maturity grows. You learn to thank God, not only for who he brought into your life, but also for who he took out. There is freedom in understanding that not every exit is an attack. Some exits are deliverance. Some departures are divine. Some separations are sacred. When you learn this, you stop trying to resurrect relationships God has allowed to die. You stop giving CPR to what heaven has declared finished. You stop reopening doors that God has firmly closed. You stop grieving what God removed and start anticipating what God is preparing. What walks away wasn't assigned to your destiny. Nothing that is essential to your purpose can be taken from you. Anyone who leaves your life leaves because their chapter is complete. God is the author of your story, and he decides when characters enter and exit. Trust his timing, trust his wisdom, trust his removal, and most importantly, trust that what remains after the subtraction is exactly what is supposed to with you when God elevates you. When God is elevating you, one of the first things he does is separate you from voices that limit your vision. You cannot go where God is calling you while listening to people who can only see where you've been. Every destiny is shaped or suffocated by voices. Voices create atmospheres. Voices influence decisions. Voices define identity. Voices determine expectations. And when the voices around you speak doubt, fear, small thinking, or negativity, they can shrink the vision God placed inside you. That is why God becomes intentional, even aggressive, removing voices that contaminate your clarity. There are voices in your life that have spoken to you for so long that their opinions feel like truth. Some voices are familiar, family voices, childhood voices, cultural voices. They have shaped how you see yourself and what you believe is possible. For years, you may have absorbed comments like nobody in our family ever did that. Don't get your hopes up. Be realistic. People like us don't succeed like that. You're too young. You're too old. You're not qualified. You're dreaming too big. These voices sound harmless on the surface. They are powerful enough to cripple your identity and limit your faith. And God knows that if you keep listening to small voices, you will keep living a small life. God separates you from limiting voices because they speak from limitation, not revelation. They speak from fear, not faith. They speak from personal experience, not divine possibility. They speak from what they have seen, not what God has shown you. When God gives you a vision, it rarely fits within the confines of human logic. It stretches you, it pushes you, it challenges you. And if you surround yourself with voices that cannot comprehend what God is doing, they will talk you out of what heaven is trying to lead you into. Some people in your life can only handle a limited version of you. They liked you better when you were unsure, insecure, dependent, stagnant because your growth made them feel safe about their own lack of movement. When you begin rising, these same voices can become critical, dismissive, or discouraging. Not because something is wrong with your vision, but because your vision threatens their comfort. God separates you from limiting voices to protect your future from the insecurity of others. Sometimes God must silence voices you once trusted. This is one of the most painful parts of elevation. It hurts when someone you value becomes a source of doubt instead of encouragement. But God knows that certain people cannot speak into the next version of you because they only understand the old version of you. They cannot guide you into a future they've never walked into. They cannot affirm a calling they've never experienced. They cannot support a greatness they've never recognized. So God removes them, not out of cruelty, but out of protection. There are moments when God isolates you, not from people, but from their opinions. He shuts down the noise so you can hear him clearly. When you enter a season of elevation, you will notice that you no longer feel comfortable sharing everything with everyone. You start guarding your vision. You start protecting your ideas. You start becoming selective about who hears your dreams. This is not pride, it is discernment. Every voice deserves access to what God is birthing in you. Some voices speak death into what God is trying to make alive. God is teaching you that vision requires privacy, investment, and protection. The wrong voices can delay the right destiny. Israel listened to the 10 spies instead of Caleb and Joshua, and an entire generation wandered for 40 years. Their destiny was not delayed by demons or enemies, but by voices. This is why God becomes so serious about who gets to speak into your spirit. He knows that elevation requires agreement, not opposition. You cannot walk into a promised place while carrying the weight of voices that don't believe in promised things. God often separates you from limiting voices by changing your environment. He will move you into new rooms with new conversations, new opportunities, new atmospheres that expand your thinking instead of confining it. One word from the right voice can unlock courage you've never accessed before. One conversation with someone who believes in your potential can shift your entire direction. God brings people into your life whose voices speak to your future, not your fears, your calling, not your comfort, your anointing, not your anxiety. When God is elevating you, He teaches you the difference between affirming voices and assigning voices. Affirming voices cheer you on emotionally, but assigning voices push you spiritually. Some voices tell you, you can do it. But other voices tell you, you must do it. God removes voices that drain you and sends voices that build you. He silences voices that see your limitations and raises voices that see your destiny. But even beyond people, there are inner voices God must silence, voices shaped by past trauma, failure, rejection, or inadequacy. These internal voices whisper lies like, you're not enough, you don't deserve this, or you will fail again. God separates you from limiting voices by renewing your mind and transforming your internal narrative. He replaces those whispers with His word. You are chosen. You are equipped. You are anointed. You are capable. You are destined. God elevates you by elevating your inner voice. As God separates you from limiting voices, you begin to rediscover your true identity. You start seeing yourself through God's eyes, not through the distorted lenses of people who couldn't understand your purpose. Your confidence rises, your vision sharpens, your faith deepens, and you begin walking in a boldness that feels unfamiliar but divine. What God is doing in you cannot be nurtured by voices that speak small, think small, believe small. That is why he separates you, not to isolate you, but to liberate you. He pulls you away from voices that limit your vision so he can connect you with voices that align with your future. He silences opinion so you can finally hear his instruction. He removes doubt so you can embrace destiny. Once you are free from limiting voices, you are free to become everything God designed you to be. When God separates you, one of the first things he reveals is the strength he already placed inside you. Strength you didn't know you had. Strength that was buried under expectations. Strength that was hidden beneath the noise of your environment. Strength that could only be discovered once you were removed from the people you depended on. Separation has a way of stripping away every crutch, every comfort zone, every false source of security, until the only thing you have left is the version of you that God created. Not the version shaped by people's opinions, not the version shaped by your environment, but the version shaped by divine design. Most of us do not realize how strong we are because we have spent years leaning on others to fill the gaps we never confronted. As long as you had the friend you always vented to, the family member you always relied on, the partner you always depended on, you never had to confront your own capacity. You never had to tap into deeper faith, deeper resilience, deeper maturity, deeper wisdom. You lived supported, never stretched, supported, but never strengthened. And so God, in his mercy, not his cruelty, allows separation to happen. He lets relationships change. He allows support systems to shift. He creates distance where there used to be closeness. Because as long as you lean on people, you will never learn to stand in the strength he placed within you. Divine separation reveals your strength by forcing you to face seasons alone that you previously thought you could only survive with others. When the circle tightens and the voices quiet down, you discover that you can do things you never imagined. You learn you can pray for yourself, encourage yourself, push yourself, discipline yourself, and even comfort yourself through the help of the Holy Spirit. You begin to realize that you were never as fragile as you thought. You were simply untested. Strength is not revealed in safety. Strength is revealed in stretching. There are moments in separation where you will surprise yourself. You will look back and say, I didn't know I could survive that. I didn't know I could get through something like this. I didn't know I could recover from that loss, rebuild after that disappointment, forgive after that betrayal, or stand after that storm. That is the power of divine separation. It does not just show you what God can do, it shows you what God can do through you. It reveals that you are stronger, more resilient, more adaptable, and more spiritually grounded than your old environment ever allowed you to become. Sometimes people kept you small because they needed you weak. They needed you dependent. They needed you reachable. They needed you predictable. They needed you to stay at a level that made them feel secure about their own stagnation. But God breaks you free from those environments so you can learn who you truly are without the weight of other people's expectations. Once you are separated, you begin discovering parts of yourself that were buried beneath the responsibility of keeping others comfortable. You begin recognizing gifts that were overshadowed by the noise of relationships that drained you. You uncover talents, passions, dreams, and capacities you didn't know you had because you were too busy surviving environments that could not see your value. Separation also builds confidence, not the arrogant kind, but the God-dependent kind. The confidence that says, if God brought me through that, he can bring me through anything. The confidence that says, I am not alone, even when people walk away. The confidence that says, if they left and I'm still standing, it means God is sustaining me. You begin to understand that people leaving did not break you. It freed you. Their absence did not weaken you. It revealed how strong you always were. In separation, God also strengthens your identity. When you are surrounded by voices, you easily absorb their labels. But when God puts you in a season where certain voices fade, you begin hearing yourself more clearly. And in hearing yourself, you start hearing God more clearly. He begins reminding you of who you are: chosen, capable, anointed, intelligent, valuable, and powerful. You begin to build your self-worth not on who stays, but on who God says you are. Strength begins to rise from within because you are no longer dependent on external validation. One of the most powerful strengths separation reveals is spiritual strength. You begin developing a deeper connection with God, not through the lens of tradition or routine, but through intimacy and reliance. You learn how to trust God because everything is going well, but because He is the only one who hasn't left. You learn how to pray not out of habit, out of necessity. You learn how to worship not because it's Sunday, but because it becomes your lifeline. Your spiritual muscles grow because separation creates spiritual hunger, and spiritual hunger produces spiritual power. As you navigate your separation, you will notice something else. You no longer panic the way you used to. You no longer crumble under pressure the way you once did. You no longer fear loneliness, rejection, or transition. You begin walking with a quiet courage that others can't explain because they don't know the battles you fought in private that built that strength. The version of you that emerges from separation is more grounded, more discerning, more courageous, more self-aware, more spiritually aligned, and more prepared for the elevation God is bringing. The strength God reveals in you during separation becomes the foundation for where He is taking you. You cannot walk into elevation with old strength. You cannot carry new responsibility with old capacity. Separation is God's training ground. It is where He toughens your spirit, sharpens your mind, clarifies your purpose, and increases your endurance. And when the elevation finally arrives, you will be able to stand at the new level without collapsing under the weight of it, because God already built your strength in the secret place. Separation does not make you weaker. It proves you were strong all along.